I want to take a moment to talk about coping and intervention strategies. Coping mechanisms can be defined or thought about in a lot of different ways. For us, kind of a basic foundational definition might be something as follows: constantly changing cognitive and behavioral efforts to manage specific external or internal demands that are seen or appraised as taking or exceeding the resources of the person. There's a lot in that definition, but you have to look at what are the demands being placed on the individual, both in terms of the behavioral expectations and the mental expectations, and does that individual need to employ assistance in some way, shape, or form? That's kind of a poor man's definition, if you will, of trying to start having a conversation about coping mechanisms. Now, coping mechanisms really can be understood by differentiating between the strategies and the styles. Again, while different, interrelated. Okay? Strategies are going to be things that you're going to focus on the problem, or you can focus on the emotion, right? Are you going to focus on the fear of failure, or are you going to focus on the act of failing in that particular contest? So think about the problem and then think about the emotion. That's going to be a strategy. A style is going to be, are you avoiding the issue or are you approaching the issue? So let's start talking about this and kind of rounding out how we look at all this stuff. Athletes cope with stress by either approaching or avoiding the situation, right? Now remember stress, we talked about distress and eustress and those types of things. Keep that in the back of your mind as we're starting to walk through this discussion. Within this framework, the athlete will either adopt an active problem-solving strategy or an emotionally focused strategy. Again, are you going to address the issue and the problem, or are you going to address the emotions such as anxiety, fear, those types of things? The dispositional hypothesis states that the athletes have a learned or an intuitive way of coping with stress and dynamics that are going to be present within these situations because of the fact that they are athletes. Okay. Now this learned or intuitive way, those are different things, right? So learning, obviously, this is something that can be a skill set that can be built, but the dispositional hypothesis is really focused on that you build that skill in terms of coping, and that skill it's going to be built through a very consistent, static, routinized process, right? It's going to be like anything else in terms of the physical training. You can build the coping skill, that dispositional hypothesis saying that you can build that coping skill the exact same way through repetition. The dynamic hypothesis is actually different. And it says the athlete's coping responses are going to change based upon unique factors of the situation. So it's going to be much more of a fluid approach, right? And if you kind of think about going back to our discussion of the mind processing bits of information, well, not all the information is going to be the same. So being able to, if you're working with athletes, being able to realize that athletes have to be flexible, adaptable, and they have to be able to see what's going on in a situation, and then in real time be able to adjust to things on the fly. Elite athletes tend to use an approach style of coping, with the vast majority of the strategies being action or problem focused. Okay? Competing in sports subjects the athlete to physical, technical, tactical, and psychological demands. We already know that. And if you are going to approach whatever stress or things that are going on, whatever problem is, and you're going to focus on the actual problem and hitting it head on as compared to looking at the emotions or avoiding it altogether, then we need to incorporate that into the various training methods. Okay? Now we know there's all these different complicated bits of information or stressors or things that can negatively impact either the mental health or even the performance psychology of elite athletes. Oftentimes you have these various buckets of training that help to prepare the athlete for facing everything within the competition that they're going to be faced with. You have the psychological training, physical training, strategizing, and somatic relaxation. Real quickly, physical training we talk a lot about. A lot of people already sort of intuitively understand that in terms of elite athletes, the physical demands, the training, the practice, that type of thing. The strategizing in terms of preparing for the performance or the competition is going to be about sort of learning the X's and O's, installing a game plan, those types of things. So what I really want to focus are those two other aspects, the psychological training and the relaxation, that can be very powerful coping strategies for athletes. That's what we want to focus on over the next few slides and minutes. In regards to psychological training, one of the simple yet powerful ways that you can engage in really impactful psychological training is through self-talk. And self-talk, you have the definition right there. The overt or covert personal dialogue in which the athlete interprets feelings, perceptions, convictions, and gives him or herself the instructions and reinforcement. Now, self-talk is exactly what it sounds like, talking to yourself. Now, whether it's overt, literally out loud, or it's covert, sort of an internal dialogue, doesn't necessarily matter. But the idea is that this is where the individual prepares psychologically for whatever's going on. Now, self-talk is pretty broad, and so we have the 4 W's of self-talk: where, when, what, why, all that kind of stuff. But and the reason we kind of break it down into those smaller little buckets is it helps to really kind of provide a context and help us understand how to measure not just the motivation, but also the psychological goals, being able to see how these different W's, the where, the when, the why, the what, are able to move the athlete forward in this self-talk or this psychological training process. So let's just take them one by one. Where? Self-talk is usually going to take place during the competition. Sometimes it takes place in practice or training, but that's going to be a distant second, right? It's primarily happening in the competition. It's really going to be used by highly skilled athletes. Why? Well, because, and that's not to be confused with the why over in the other column, but it's going to be used, the why is in regards to why it's used by highly skilled athletes. You have to have a modicum of foundational training already underneath your belt, right? You already have to have sort of a mastery of the physical. You have to be an elite athlete that has toned and honed your body to the point that it has the muscle memory to be extremely athletic or sport specific ready. Okay? And so then this psychological part is sort of helping that elite athlete take the next step. Okay, so that's why it's primarily used in competition, because oftentimes, you know, that some of this training is going to happen in practice. There's going to be coaches or there's going to be advisors. There's going to be, you know, there's going to be more individuals around to sort of help with that psychological and the training or the coaching process. Okay, when does self-talk take place? Well, it depends, but it's sort of equally distributed to before the competition and then during the competition. And a lot of it depends on the sport, and it depends on the athlete's role within that sport, what position they play, or if they're a team sport athlete versus an individual athlete, those types of things. But self-talk before the competition can help you manage the anxiety, the arousal, the emotions. It helps you start to engage in that thought-stopping and centering process, all right? But during the competition, it's kind of the same thing. It's helping you manage those emotions. And we're going to talk a little bit more about, you know, kind of the what and the why of that. But the idea is that this is going to be really important, especially during the competition, because during the actual execution of plays or a match or something like that, you can't always have the coach providing that real-time advice. Okay, think about a tennis match. You can't necessarily engage with your coach, right? So you have to really rely on yourself if you're an individual sport athlete. If you're a team sport athlete, as let's say a football play is going on, maybe the coach is over there yelling and those types of things, but you can't necessarily fully engage with them. All right, so the during the competition is usually going to be kind of up to the individual. Now the why. The why of self-talk describes its roles and functions, and there's 2 basic or main functions or components, right? And you're doing this self-talk as psychological training because it helps assist in the cognitive aspect, right? The cognitive aspect will help you understand the skill development, but also the skill execution, right? So the self-talk helps you stay involved in executing that skill at a high level, whether that's something like being on the balance beam, or if you're in baseball or softball, trying to swing the bat through the zone at the correct level and plane, those types of things. The why really helps to try to focus on improving performance, right? If you stick to the mechanistic aspect of that skill, how maybe you're swinging your arm with a tennis racket or something like that. And that's a bad example because I know nothing about tennis, right? But think about that technical aspect of whatever sport that athlete's involved with. And as this self-talk will help you focus on the specific technical aspect so you can perform at the optimal level. And then that's going to help as you start to stack all of these technical skills together, right? So in terms of your shooting form for a basketball, right? In terms of getting your knees and your hips, and then your elbow and your shoulder, your hand, all that stuff in alignment. Each one of those is a unique, small technical aspect. And self-talk can help you bring all those things together so the overall performance is at a high level. Also, the self-talk can help sort of motivate you. As you're walking through mentally the connection of these different technical aspects of whatever it is you're trying to execute, then you can start getting into making sure that the technical performance can then be an elite performance. And the more you focus on those individual things, the more you then focus on wanting to do things properly and to do them at a high level. But what I really like is the what. This is sort of the nitty-gritty, if you will, of self-talk. The content, the structure of the structure of self-talk is really going to be small keywords, phrases. You're probably not going to have full-on paragraphs that you're sort of reciting to yourself. It's not necessarily a full-on mantra or anything like that. But you're going to sort of combine specific and task-instructed phrases together. All right? And these help to recenter or refocus the mind on what the body is doing, but then also what the body is doing, what the body is doing next, what's the body doing next, and so on and so forth, right? It's starting to kind of focus and hone in on not just that moment, but a moment in the future, and then another moment in the future, and those types of things. And so there are 3 types of kind of the what, if you will, of self-talk. You have task-specific statements. So I attempted to play baseball poorly. I'll admit that. But just always, don't drop your shoulder. As I'm in the batter's box, don't drop your shoulder. So kind of just keep your shoulder up. Don't drop it. Don't drop your shoulder. Right? That, to the outside observer, that may not mean a lot. I mean, it says, yes, don't drop your shoulder, but it doesn't say in what form or fashion. Lots of times if you're talking about flip your hips, if you're a defensive back in football, flip your hips. Well, flipping your hips, what you actually mean kind of a rotation and stuff like that, because that allows you in terms of being fluid in your drop and your back pedal and things like that. So again, something that's task specific. Now, you can also, the what of self-talk could be really just a lot about encouragement and motivation. If you fail at a particular task, nice work, you'll get them next time type of thing. But I actually kind of want to fall back on sort of the Tom Brady thing, right? Where he just is kind of like, let's go, and he sort of screams it. And it's definitely something that's taken on it's kind of a pop cultural feel to it, right? A lot of people now, let's go as an actual word, or as a phrase, excuse me, let's go. It's not super specific, right? But it's all about encouragement. It's all about effort. It's all about sort of amping up that personal energy and sort of then displaying that. And that's something that works for him. Also, mood words are really, really common. When you talk about, going hard, going fast, just explode. If you're talking about, I even heard an elite track and field athlete, and they were a sprinter, and as they were getting into their blocks, that's where I pulled the word explode from, because they were just saying explode. And that's something for them in terms of making sure that they're focused on getting out of the blocks in a timely manner, keeping your head down for the first 5-10 meters, whatever it is, and then kind of getting to the middle of the race and then exploding at the end as well, right? As you cross the finish line. So you have explode being at a couple different junctures in that 9-10 seconds that they're going to be running. So that's really the what. Seems very, very simple, because if you were to hear an elite athlete engage in self-talk, there's not necessarily going to be a ton that you hear. There's not a lot, but those key words and phrases mean a lot to them because they focus on maybe some particular aspect, not dropping your shoulder, keeping your hips aligned, whatever it is. They might be focused on the encouragement, and the effort is motivation in a way of kind of trying to get themselves engaged into the moment. Or it's the mood words that really help to focus on kind of a thought and a feeling. It's a way of centering the mind and not necessarily associated with anything specific, but something that sort of resonates with the individual as being actively engaged. In order for self-talk to really be effective, here's kind of a list. It needs to be brief. And we would say, phonetically simple. It can't be, polysyllabic. You can't have words that are extremely long, because then the mind's focusing too much on pronouncing and stuff like that. It needs to be somehow associated with some skill, and there needs to be a sense of timing to it. And there's going to be a sense of not just timing, but rhythm, and that these things are somehow, it's the mind, the body, and then at this point, if you're actually literally saying the words out loud, then the articulation of all these things, it's bringing all of the focus, the energy, the body of the athlete kind of in alignment. Okay? Again, as in previous things you've seen, you feel free to click on that, and you can actually see a little bit about self-talk and those types of things. We're not necessarily going to do it here, but it might be for those that want a little bit more information. Now, we talked a little bit about psychological training. That's what self-talk was. So let's talk a little bit about relaxation. And this is kind of interesting. And this is not necessarily just it's not just physical relaxation, but what you're doing, it's an interplay between the mind and the body again. Because we know that there's really only one way to kind of get out of that anxiety stress spiral, and that's to reverse the process. Right? And here are a couple different things that have been proven over time, empirically, not just psychologically, but also with statistical research, that that you're able to kind of stop this spiral of anxiety or tension and stress. One is deep breathing, right? And again, this is that deep chest or abdominal cavity breathing. So the diaphragm is located in the abdomen, and what you're doing is it's regulated breathing, but it's very, very deep. It's almost slow, right? One example it's called squared breathing. So you kind of inhale. So you kind of count, inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and then start it again. And that it's kind of a square if you think about it that way. And all that's doing is that one way to regulate the mind or the emotions is through that psychosomatic engagement, right? So regulate the body. And if the body starts to slow down and become much more engaged and deliberate, then the theory is the mind will follow. For those of you that have been involved in something like yoga, yoga is really predicated on controlling, monitoring, examining the breathing process. And being able to control that helps you control the mind, and it helps to control other aspects of the body. Progressive relaxation, and this one's really interesting. Again, this is about muscles, and so the mind-body dichotomy. You want to control the body so that you can control the emotions, right? So think about taking a moment and tensing every muscle, starting with your toes, and then slowly working up your legs, and then slowly tensing the muscles in your abdomen and your arms, and then tensing your facial muscles. Okay, and once they're all tense, then slowly start releasing the tension, maybe with your eyebrows and your face, down through your shoulders, through your arms, through your abdomen, and then down your legs. And as you can start to see is that if you do that, then you're starting to control and slow down, sort of reverse that anxiety spiral, because you're controlling the body, which then you're hopefully going to control the emotions. Those emotions aren't going to spiral out of control. They're going to stop and then maybe even, as we hope, slowly reverse themselves. Meditation, again, if we're sort of kind of in meditation, involves actually progressive relaxation. It involves deep breathing, and it involves mental focus. And so the athlete is uncritically focusing on something. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a way of take something outside of perhaps the competition or the athletic realm. And this is sometimes during meditation, if you hear music, because you kind of want that ambient white noise, if you will. And that can be part of this process where you are focusing on nothing is one of the ways it's been explained to me, right? So deep meditation is actually really, really difficult to do because your mind is either uncritically focused or critically focused on nothing, however you want to kind of look at it, right? But you're trying to mentally keep out the clutter, right? All the different things. One way that it was described to me was that one way of meditating was kind of picture yourself in your mind, your eyes are closed, and you're almost putting up mental plywood around you and building slowly a three-dimensional cube that you are mentally sitting in the middle, and you've literally built a barrier to all the quote-unquote outside noise, and then you kind of walk into that space, and that's where you reside. That's something that has, meditation, a lot of people say, well, I've meditated on these things, but the way that we're kind of talking about it here is this is something that usually takes quite a bit of practice in terms of honing how the meditation process works for you. It's a process of exploration, and it's a process to see kind of what works, what doesn't work, and then really measuring the impact of that in terms of on your athletic performance, on your mental health, and then everything else in between. Finally, another way that we can kind of try to understand relaxation is through biofeedback. And this is kind of interesting because you are using the tools of medicine, and you're able to follow, rate, track, pattern skin temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, those types of things. So you can engage. Now, hopefully what you're able to see is that all of these different ways of approaching relaxation or promoting relaxation can be used kind of at the same time, right? So maybe biofeedback and deep breathing would be a nice way to start. You might take blood pressure and heart rate and connect that with deep breathing. I think it's kind of interesting. Trauma patients and elite athletes oftentimes have had some really good success with biofeedback. So in the world of social work and counseling and dealing with psychological trauma, biofeedback is really, really impactful and popular. It's also really impactful and popular with elite athletes that are trying to walk through a lot of, the relaxation of being able to control pressure, control what you can control, and then seeing how the mind and the body can function at an optimal level. Finally, just want to take a moment to talk about the matching hypothesis and interventions, right? So interventions may be selected or instituted by a coach or leaders to somehow either connect, relax, or energize the athlete or the team. Oftentimes in the world of sort of organizational interventions, you'll see that these are used very, very often, not just in team settings, like in the athletic world, but also in high performance teams. So if you're talking about special units in the military or first responders, but then also in corporate America, you tend to have a lot of these team energizing strategies and those types of things. So this is something these intervention strategies happen with individuals and then all across different types of organizations. But you have the two basic types of organizational intervention strategies, the individual and then the team. The team strategy is going to focus on kind of bringing social cohesion together and doing that through a shared experience. So shared goal setting processes, sharing either publicity, basically bulletin board material, what someone on the other team said about your team, that tends to bring, if you promote that and show people what it says, then that tends to bring a team together. Another way to actually bring a team together is there's this old adage that those that sweat together become together, right? And so almost like internal competition, being able to struggle against your own team. You see this a lot with scrimmages and things like that, and that builds not just competition, but it also builds camaraderie as well. Pride drills, you can link to a video there and just kind of see what those are in the world of football. An individual energizing strategy would be, self-talk is going to be very, very important. There's also another thing here. You can click on that imagery that's hyperlinked there and kind of see how that works. But walking through the individual goal setting process and really focusing on that selective attention is going to be really, really important. That's going to be a very impactful individual intervention strategy. Okay, because the individual does not necessarily rely on all of the group in a team setting, so they have to sort of manufacture these things on their own. Now, it doesn't mean that they're in social isolation, because oftentimes in individual sports you do have coaches and you do have a team around you, but a lot of that that self-talk, that focusing of attention is going to be done by the individual.